Welcome to Rings and Things, where we discuss Tolkien adaptations and texts.
We're just two hobbits from the Shire, one bringing the other along on this adventure.
I'm your host, Agnes, and this is my co-host,
recurring guest star,
JD. Today we're going to be covering the second movie in the Hobbit trilogy, The Desolation of Smaug.
Right.
So, I want to open with some initial thoughts. This is going to make our audience angry.
Okay.
Here's my hot take. I don't much like the Hobbit book.
I like the Hobbit book, so that could be your take.
Oh, absolutely. This is absolutely my take. The Hobbit book is beloved by many people, and I do not wish to take that joy away from anyone who has it. Mm-hmm. If you enjoy the Hobbit book, I admire you greatly, and I wish that I could enjoy it like you do.
Right. You just personally don't enjoy it, which you can't help.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't. I have increased my appreciation of it very much. Mm-hmm. But appreciation and enjoyment are quite different feelings. My main complaints about the Hobbit book are three things. First, I take some issue with the writing style. Mm-hmm. It speaks in the first person to the reader, and that's just not a style I particularly like. Mm-hmm. It's also not going to be an issue in a movie.
So, the Lord of the Rings book trilogy, or book, I guess you could say, they are in third person?
The Hobbit is also in third person. The Lord of the Rings is in third person. The Hobbit is also in third person. It's just that sometimes that narrator steps through that fourth wall and says, "Now, children, I know that you know what's going on here, but remember that poor Bilbo did not."
Got it. I vaguely, like I said, I read these books long ago, or I didn't read the Lord of the Rings at all. I read The Hobbit long ago, and I do remember that, actually. What other parts of the Hobbit book aren't your favorite?
The next thing I take issue with is that the dwarves seem to have no particularly special need of specifically a burglar in the book. They want a 14th member to fill out their party so they don't have the unlucky number of 13. But then somehow they get stuck on the idea that they need a burglar, and there's never any reason given for this. Mm-hmm. It's even commented upon later in the text that they didn't have a plan about how they were going to get the treasure from Smaug when they get to the mountain. Mm-hmm. And you saw that mound of treasure that Bilbo was looking at. What is a burglar supposed to do with that mound of treasure? Is he going to sneak it out in his pockets as precious?
Just off the top of my head, maybe just as a scout, but I guess they could hire a scout then, right?
Yeah, why a burglar?
Yeah, no, they need somebody sneaky and stuff like that, but a burglar seems very oddly specific, even in the realm of needing someone sneaky.
Yes. And the third thing that bothers me with the Hobbit book is that Bard lacks development as a character early on.
Yes, I do. Actually, from my remembering, Bard just shows up out of nowhere.
He shows up on the same page that he does the big thing.
Right. I don't know. Okay, so for my opinion, and maybe I'll feel different reading this book as an adult, I didn't mind speaking directly to the reader. I don't even mind Bard coming out of nowhere and not having development. For me, that kind of, the way I remember it feeling was like, because the battle is the big deal, and it's like the dragon was a fake out, and it was just the best way to like say in, I guess, one page, as you said, this dragon isn't a threat anymore. We're moving on. Like, and I got that, and I enjoyed it personally. I didn't, and I think your next point addresses this a bit more. I don't like Bard having more of a role. Maybe if it was good, but there's a lot of parts. And I didn't put notes on this, so maybe this is kind of spoiling later our outline, but I thought just a lot of this parts with Bard felt drawn on. Yeah,
I'll get to commenting about that later on in the outline. I don't think I would have minded the tone of the narrator in the book nearly as much if I had not read The Lord of the Rings first.
Yeah, that's another point. I read The Hobbit without reading Lord of the Rings, so especially if you have your expectations set for the narrator to not talk to you directly and explain something, it would be pretty jarring, at least right up front, to say the least.
The Lord of the Rings was in many ways the first book that I ever read. I mean, I had read Dr. Seuss, I was literate, but I hadn't voluntarily read a real book, even a real children's book, chapter book. Mm-hmm. The respect that I felt from the Lord of the Rings narrator was something that I sorely lacked when I came to The Hobbit, and it was a big shock for me.
So actually, another book I read from this period of time was A Series of Unfortunate Events, and the narrator does this in that book series a lot, too, where they'll say something directly to the reader in first person, and they do tongue-in-cheek. They make fun of authors doing that by doing it so frequently. I don't know if I read those books like literally back to back, but there's all a blur, middle school reading hour. I either got those references because of this, or I read this book first and got those references because I read this book. But yeah, it's something that people definitely make fun of and don't like anymore. It's out of style for a modern book.
And even when it is a style, it's seen as a children's style.
Yeah.
And it's just something I don't like.
Yeah, I do also agree that maybe if in a movie having the character show up and kill the dragon out of nowhere would have been a bit weird. So maybe giving Bard a bit of a character development and arc makes sense. The entire book, the dragon's the big threat, then suddenly it's gone, it floored me. I liked that. And honestly, maybe the movie should have done that too.
Well, I do feel that the Hobbit movies try to address the issues that I just outlined. Mm-hmm. And I like the fact that the Hobbit movies try to address these issues. Yeah. But ultimately, I feel the Hobbit movies don't deliver on these issues.
The burglar one's a very good point, I'll say.
Thank you.
So, the movie starts, and it cleared up some things about the nature of Gandalf and Thorin's relationship right off the bat. They're discussing, it's a flashback, right? And it shows Gandalf kind of forming this party that eventually harasses poor Bilbo in his home. Like, Gandalf always is a big question mark for me. I don't get it, why he... Like, if I were Thorin, I'd be more skeptical than Thorin even was, which he was a bit, but I guess he's also desperate.
Yeah, and Gandalf knows things and has artifacts.
Yeah, like, it makes more sense because of the scene, and they go over both the Arkenstone and they touch on the Dwarven Ring in the scene, and it kind of...
Only in the extended.
Only in the extended. Okay, and it definitely just like, okay, so Gandalf is worried about these magical artifacts. He's a little bit worried about a dragon. Like, it does seem like something a wizard would do, I guess.
And Gandalf isn't an unknown entity.
Yeah, that's true. Thorin has heard of Gandalf.
And like you said, they go into talking about the Arkenstone in this scene. And in this prologue, it makes unequivocally clear why they need a burglar. Mm-hmm. The Arkenstone, remember from the prologue of the first movie, was what Thror used to declare himself king of all the dwarven clans. The right. Arkenstone gives you the right to be king of all the dwarves in the movie.
Yeah, Thorin explicitly says they didn't swear an oath to my bloodline or something to that effect. They swore an oath to the one who holds the Arkenstone.
So, of course, you're going to want a burglar to go in and steal the Arkenstone and just the Arkenstone, leave the cups, leave the coins. Mm-hmm. Just get me the Arkenstone so that then I have the right to call the 7 dwarf clans, raise an army against the dragon, and get all my cups and coins.
So outside of also not being able to steal the entire horde, were the dwarves planning on from the beginning in either the movie or the book, if you want to comment on this, to like slay the dragon? Was that their battle plan to start?
The book dwarves don't have a plan.
And it seems like the movie dwarves are more going to get this stone, gather an army, come back.
Exactly. I would say that's the movie dwarves plan, which I think makes a lot more sense than the book dwarves plan, honestly.
Or lack thereof.
I really wish the movie had delivered on this plotline to foreshadow what's going to happen. I absolutely love what this scene sets up. Mm-hmm. It's fantastic. Please stick with this.
Is this something in the third movie, which I to be upfront, I haven't seen yet, that the Arkenstone fails to deliver?
They decide to follow the book in the third movie. This is an instance where they should have stuck to their guns and not followed the book. They set it up to not follow the book, and then the third movie follows the book.
Yeah.
And to me, it's a big letdown. I told you this episode would make you angry.
Yeah, there's some hot takes coming out, and then also just some aggravating parts of the movie, too. So you get angry on both ends there.
Something else I noticed about this intro scene was that Gandalf seems to be very interested in rings at this point, even before Bilbo has found the One Ring. And this is something that I would find perhaps a little inconsistent with book lore. But given the release of War of the Rohirrim recently, I actually find it very consistent at the end of War of the Rohirrim, where Hera is going off to talk to Gandalf about rings.
So book Gandalf doesn't care about rings very much until the Ring of Power is shown to be a threat, or only cares about the Ring of Power?
He starts caring about rings when he notices that Bilbo is being affected by what later proves to be the One Ring.
Okay. I feel like it's in character for Gandalf, a wizard, to care about these magic rings, even outside of that. Not to want to wield them, but to know where they are and how they're affecting the world. Seems it fits in with who I think Gandalf is.
This is just more Saruman's domain, is the thing.
Oh, yeah.
So he's not stepping on what Saruman is supposed to be the expert in.
Got it.
So yeah, just a little thing that I noticed in light of War of the Rohirrim, that movie Gandalf does seem interested in rings.
Yeah, extended universe Gandalf.
Yes, true. In the movie, they show up at the house of Beorn.
Right, they're fleeing orc pursuers. Gandalf kind of warns them. Oh, and then they come across, well, what is revealed to be Beorn, but a strange monster. They hide out in his house. I feel like this is kind of where... I said in the notes where it goes from a job to the adventure. Maybe that's not right, but where the action picks up, right? Where the movie starts to just like rant. The last movie maybe felt more like an adventure, and this felt more like a more serious conflict going forward from here, if that makes sense.
Okay. I felt that the Beorn scenes actually preserved a lot of the lightheartedness of the book.
Yeah, so I do remember the Beorn scene, actually. It's one of the few scenes that stuck with me. And I do... Gandalf introducing the dwarves and telling the story, I feel like the movie could have done it a bit better. Because Beorn didn't seem as invested in the Gandalf story as the dwarves were coming out. That's a small nitpick for me.
Gandalf introducing the dwarves to Beorn is only an extended scene.
Oh, okay. That's fun. It's very odd what they cut out. Okay. And that's in the book, too. I remember it. I remember it clearly as, like, for me, part of the, like, my respect for Tolkien was when I read The Hobbit, how witty and clever he was, and having Gandalf trick Beorn into letting slowly 13 dwarves and a hobbit into his home by telling him a real good story felt very, like, I don't know, just exactly what a lighthearted fantasy adventure should have in it, you know?
It is a great scene in the book, even though I have my issues with the book. It's still a great scene.
Yeah.
And take what issue you may with how Gandalf introduces the dwarves to Beorn in this movie, it still does it infinitely better than not doing it at all.
Yeah, cutting it completely as a book scene is wild, because like I don't know. I don't know if this is the smartest idea, but I feel like just doing what was in the book and making one Hobbit movie really well would have been more interesting for me, personally.
If they had just done well what they set out to do in the second movie, things would have gone all right.
Okay, and maybe I should have covered this more in my initial thoughts. I thought there was great parts and awful parts.
Agree.
There was no in between. I was either, like, sitting on the edge of my seat or sitting, like, with my hands on my head, you know, like, covering my face, like, when is this going to be done? And I didn't feel much in between those two emotions.
There's a lot of wonderful things in this movie, and then it just derails.
I agree. I think, I agree it derails, but I think after the point it derails, there's some things that I still enjoyed. At least, we'll get more as we go on in our outline, but there were some things I enjoyed even in the later half of the movie. So
after the House of Beorn, the dwarves and Bilbo find themselves in a dark and terrible forest.
Right, yeah, Gandalf splits, too.
Yep.
But while Gandalf is heading out, he's struggling with and concealing the ring from him. Doesn't mention it to him, he hides it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is not good. I mean, I know it works out for Bilbo in the end compared to a lot of the ring holders, but still, like, the ring's power, with it not being strictly mind control and being more, like, affecting the emotions, always is, like, ugh, it gives me the willies. I would never want to be under the influence of something like that.
Yeah, I would say that this is where we really start to see Bilbo's behavior be really sus from influence from the ring.
Yeah, and so as they enter the scene, and as they enter the forest in this scene, Peter Jackson being a horror director, still he shows it in the scene where they're being affected by something like messing with their senses after they follow the path as long as they can. They have to go off, and after that they start to get delirious. Something affects their senses, and I felt like just the nature of them wandering in this forest and becoming more delirious, very much like that's like set off alarm bells. I felt like the horror movie influence from the director in this part.
It was very trippy.
Yeah, it was also trippy. They did that on purpose, but it freaked me out.
For sure. I was realizing when I was watching the forest scene that for a guy who liked trees, Tolkien's forests are actually really dark.
Yeah.
Mirkwood is actually infested with evil. Fangorn is so perilous that Celeborn warns against it. And the old forest in the books even has its darkness. Lorien isn't a place you even want to go.
Yeah, I feel like it's a healthy respect that he has. Trees are great. Forests have things other than trees that are, if you're in an untamed forest, there's some things that are definitely spooky to a person out in them.
I also think that he respects trees so much that he gives them moral freedom of choice.
Forests, definitely, anybody who likes nature has a healthy fear of forests. Even though, nature provides for us, there's just things in the forest that, not even like supernatural, just the nature of forests sometimes are hard for humans to deal with,
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things you find in forests sometimes is apparently a white stag.
Thorin shooting at the white stag was very bad of him. I could tell, but go more into it because that really, I was shaking my head at this guy.
White stags have a significant literary symbolism. They can indicate committing a transgression, mm-hmm. and white stags can also indicate the beginning of a quest, especially one involving fairies. And I think both of these particular interpretations seem especially fitting to this context. The dwarves and Bilbo are trespassing into the Elven Kingdom. They might not know it, but they are committing this transgression. Mm-hmm. And remember that elves and fairies, in Tolkien's mind, are actually the same. When Tolkien was writing a white stag scene in the book, he's thinking of elves as fairies.
Yeah.
So, like you mentioned, Thorin shot at the white stag but missed. Bilbo said he shouldn't have done that, because Bilbo's smart. Bilbo even called it bad luck. Thorin's reply, "We make our own luck," is very contradictory to the role that luck plays in the books.
Thorin's character, he's not wise, but he has a certain tenacity, might be the word I'm thinking of, but a certain...
Hubris?
Hubris is on the other end. There's a good and bad side to being the type of character that Thorin is. On one hand, you are, to the best of your ability, able to get stuff done that you want. You're able to push your will onto the world. On the other hand, the downside to that is, when you shoot at a deer thinking you make your own luck, it backfires. And so Thorin hubris is on one hand, and the other hand is like a drive or motivation that I still respect, but I do it's very obvious what it's culminating to, even if I didn't know Thorin's fate,
Yeah.
Also, I think I remember from another thing's appearance of a white stag indicating a blessing from, the forest, too. I feel like I've heard that before. So it feels very just awful to shoot at it.
Yeah, you don't want to shoot at your blessing from the forest. So one of the things I noticed when they were in the forest scene was that Bilbo puts on the ring and he suddenly understands the spiders.
Oh, I did notice that. I didn't know if it was him understanding them all of a sudden or something else. They could just talk all of a sudden. But yeah. No.
I assumed that was what it was because the spiders were hissing and clicking before. Then he puts on the ring and suddenly the spiders are speaking English.
Oh, okay.
And I thought this was very interesting because I had just read in the Lord of the Rings books where Sam puts on the ring right outside of Mordor, and the narrator comments that perhaps the ring gives understanding of the servants of the enemy.
Okay.
So I think that the ring is granting understanding of spiders.
Yeah.
It also occurred to me that since these spiders in Mirkwood are Shelob's children, and they possess speech, that to me this implies that Shelob must also possess speech. It's one of those questions that gets knocked around as to, what do you think? Can Shelob actually talk? She doesn't talk in the book, but that doesn't, just because she doesn't necessarily mean she can't.
Well, nobody used the ring around Shelob in the book or the movie. Well, in the movie I know, in the book I imagine.
That is true. That is also a fair point. Shelob doesn't talk. No one wears the ring around her.
I have a third point, too. There's no other spiders for Shelob to talk to.
No, but she could be yelling at her prey.
Yeah.
Stop, get back here.
Does she make spider noises in the movie? She makes spider noises, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, spidery noises.
I'm going to wholeheartedly agree that if somebody put on the ring, they could have heard Shelob cursing at them.
I bet. Especially since the main drift of how things work in this universe is that things fade and degrade over time. I don't think that Shelob's children would have an ability that Shelob didn't.
Yeah, no, that's another thing. I was even going to ask, it depends what they're Shelob's children. The only way they would have abilities that she didn't have is it was from their father, presumably. But that seems like a reach.
He was probably more like a normal spider.
Yeah, just another spider, too. Yeah, we don't know much about him.
And then the elves show up. The note I wrote was, wait, elves?
Yeah, no, I didn't like this at all.
In the book, Bilbo saves them from the spiders.
Mm-hmm. I don't remember. See, I was a long time ago. I don't remember how the book goes and connects everything. Was there elves, like the Elven King, any of that in this part in Mirkwood?
Yes.
There was, okay. But they didn't get saved from elves and the spiders.
No, the elves do not save the dwarves and Bilbo from the spiders, but the dwarves and Bilbo do end up in the Hall of the Elven King, and he does put the dwarves in prison, and Bilbo wears the ring for weeks and eventually breaks the dwarves out.
In the books.
In the books,
right.
Short of it.
Yeah.
But in the movie, we get a more extended look at the elves, which I think is an entirely reasonable adaptation choice. In the books, remember, The Lord of the Rings didn't exist. There was no Legolas. Elves were very different in The Hobbit.
Yes.
The Elven King is never even named. He's just ever called the Elven King. But
right.
once the Hobbit gets linked up with the Lord of the Rings, then you get Legolas, who's a prince coming from Mirkwood, whose dad is Thranduil. Then that imposes Thranduil being the Elven King that the dwarves met in The Hobbit, even though he's never called Thranduil in The Hobbit.
Okay, so it was just connecting notes or background information on Legolas that was given us in the Lord of the Rings to this character.
Yes.
Got it.
So Legolas is not in The Hobbit, Tauriel is not in The Hobbit, but to me it makes perfect sense to have Legolas in The Hobbit movie, and it makes perfect sense to have an extra character to flesh out the elven realm, and it makes sense to make her a woman.
I like Tauriel outside of the thing that we're going to talk about later with... I like her character when she's not in a romance subplot a lot.
Yes.
I know you just showed me the work and explained it, but it felt very contrived having Legolas there, not knowing that background. Watching the movie through the first time, I felt like it was just fan service. It's nice to know there's some justification to it, but it felt gratuitous to me.
And what that says is that they could have done it better.
There's things I do like and don't like about Legolas's depiction in this movie, but altogether I feel like it should have, before I knew all that, and there's a good reason in background lore, I felt like it could have been scrapped and worked out differently for sure.
Well, Legolas was not in the Hobbit book. That's might be some of what you're picking up on there, is that, in a sense, he is going to be extraneous to the Hobbit plot because he wasn't in the Hobbit.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they'd be missing a entirely reasonable opportunity to put Legolas in. Legolas was totally in the hall when the dwarves were there.
Yeah.
He totally was.
So, and again, knowing that, it does make it a little bit better, but they should have done it differently, for sure.
Yeah.
It seems like the whole theme of this was they had the right idea, but they did it wrong.
Exactly. This is my problem with the Hobbit movies. They had the right idea, and they did it wrong.
Mm-hmm. So, and Legolas is also very mean to the dwarves. And I get he's home, he's defending his home, and also dwarf-elf relations aren't great, but he's just like he's rude. I don't remember him being so rude at all in the movies, the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Maybe he grew by then.
Yeah, I mean, this is a prequel. This could be like younger, edgier Legolas.
Mm-hmm. Well, younger, edgier doesn't actually justify the vulgarity that continues once they take the dwarves to prison.
Yeah.
Because there's a full-on dirty joke.
Yeah, and then honestly, so after you mentioned in the last one that it's a problem compared to the rest. And then this scene came on. I was like, okay, this is exactly what she's talking about. It's overt. It's not even subtle, and I couldn't even imagine explaining it to like one of my kids.
And it's not classy.
No, not very at all.
If you can work in something and it has an alternate explanation, or it can at least be classy, I still might not like it, but you at least have something going for you.
Yeah.
This has nothing going for it.
The only thing I'll say in the defense of the vulgar joke is, I mean, they were in a jail and it was a dwarf. Like, it's probably the most vulgar spot in Middle Earth, but I don't know. We don't have to see it.
It doesn't belong in my Tolkien adaptations.
I respect that and agree. So in this scene, I remember Balin, when they were in jail, they were all in the jail cells. He said something, and I can't even remember exactly what, but it just showed a level of restraint and wisdom from him that the rest were not at all showing. He was kind of sitting it out and planning it out more. I don't know. Balin's definitely smarter than the rest of the dwarves in his party, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Balin's a good dwarf. But on the other hand,
Thundrel is nasty to them. I get that you're not supposed to like him, but it caught me off guard. Most of the time I feel like the elves, they have a reputation of being mean to the dwarves, but we never see it. Like, we don't get why Gimli's so mad at Rivendell during the council, right?
Yeah, he just won't see the ring in the hands of an elf.
Yeah, but if how Thundrel treats the dwarves is like common in this world, like, I don't know, it makes him a great villain. I don't know, he doesn't end up being truly a villain, but it makes him a good antagonist, maybe. I really just was surprised and shocked to see somebody talking so, like, nasty from the elf side. They're usually more poised.
I wanted to ask you, what did you get out of the face change thing that Thranduil does, where he was was he showing an old injury that he healed from, or was he showing what's under his glamour? How did you interpret the scene where he shows his face ugly?
I guess if I had to explain what I thought, because I was just confused by it mostly, but like showing under the glamour suggestion is the closest. Like, I thought, like, almost like he used magic to be intimidating, but if that's really what he looks like, I guess it's more taking the magic off to be intimidating, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
And I feel like showing your true self that you hide is a little bit more vulnerable than showing an old injury that you healed from.
Yeah.
But I felt the movie wasn't really clear about what precisely was happening here.
I figured it was, you know how when Gandalf, like, can shout, he grows like a foot sometimes in these movies, and like the background turns black. I figured it was the elf version of that. Mm-hmm. But okay. I don't know if that's what he actually looks like or if it was conjured. I think I thought it was conjured, but it might make more sense that he was more showing what his true form.
Okay.
Like thematically and also logistically, Mm-hmm. It was confusing, to say the least.
Yeah. Well, after they get out of prison in the Elf King's realm, then they take a barrel ride down to Lake Town.
This was cool for 2 minutes.
You made a note that said this scene went on for way, way too long.
Yeah.
I made a note that said at this point it begins to feel like too many action sequences. We both identified this as the problem.
I could have dealt with it, again, if it was half the length, and then even then it would have been like, well, that was a long time.
Yeah.
For me, even if it was a short action scene, I feel like it would have been okay to keep the tempo going. I don't think there was too many, but oh my goodness, it was just, and I get that it was a 3-way battle, so there was a lot going on. I just feel like it should have been resolved so much quicker for the viewer's sake.
I agree with you. The barrel ride is where I originally noted that the movie goes downhill from.
The only complaint I really had before this scene was Legolas, which we covered and is a bit more forgivable after discussing it. Mm-hmm. After this, I'd say maybe every other scene begins to be like, what is this doing? Or why am I watching this specifically right now? well, if it starts to bog down, there's a lot of things that's just like, ugh, I don't care. Cut to the other half of the action, wherever it is,
Yeah, I definitely agree. I do think that introducing Bard earlier than in the book is a great choice. I don't much care for the story they've given him. I think it's pretty meh. Mm-hmm. But he does need to be brought in before the page on which he fulfills his purpose to the main story.
I feel like for a movie, I respect that. And I also agree heavily that the story they have given him was meh. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great.
If this were the low part of the movie, it would be a good movie.
Yes.
So, in the books, Thorin never promised gold to the men of Lake Town. He only promises to resume trade when he's king under the mountain. I just found this an interesting adaptation choice because it'll make his future actions all the worse in the movie.
It makes him seem, if he intends to actually deliver that, then it makes him like a more generous person, which I got the vibe that he intended to pay that when he promised it.
Yeah, movie Thorin intends to pay it at this point. Mm-hmm. Book Thorin never offers it.
Right. And so all in all, that's like a +1 into Thorin being a more kind ruler.
That's true.
Although maybe promising it and then what happens later makes it worse. I don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking about it as being that it was better to not promise than it is to promise and break it.
Yeah, promise and fail to keep it might be worse.
But you're completely right. The promising and then delivering is better than not promising.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and again, he intended, as far as I could tell, it seemed like a genuine.
Yeah. I'm not accusing Desolation of Smaug Thorin of any kind of deception. It's just that foreshadowing, we know that Thorin isn't going to deliver on this promise, and I feel it undercuts his honor a little bit more to have promised and then not delivered.
Yeah, and I see where you're coming from that.
So I take real issue with this Morgul shaft business. Keely has been shot in the leg by a Morgul shaft.
Yeah.
We're going to revisit this later, but I want to know, what is the obsession with Morgul blank? This is going to come up in Rings of Power too, and it's going to annoy me there as well.
It's very helpful to injure a character long term, and it doesn't make sense for him to be injured from a regular arrow.
But you can't just put Morgul on front of a weapon. That's not how it works.
I feel like they really could. That's also the other thing. They could just use a regular arrow to disable him.
He gets infected with E. coli or something.
Yeah, the wound is gangrenous. Like there's so many like things they could have done. I feel, I don't know, maybe they really thought Morgul sounded cool. It does sound pretty cool.
It sounds cool and makes no sense.
Using it on everything kind of dampens the Morgul Blade's effect, though, for sure.
There's one instance of a Morgul blade where the Witch King himself stabs the ring bearer Frodo Baggins, and this is a rare instance. The King of Morgul himself stabs him with it. Makes sense. Random arrow hits dwarf. Is an entirely different situation.
Though it does help more my question on how did Aragorn know how to treat a Morgul wound in the Fellowship of the Ring if they're using them left and right, Morgul shafts. And
This ties in great with my next point. I want to know how Owen and Beaufort know how to treat a Morgul wound. I want to know how they know what Kingsfoil is.
Yeah.
And here's my generous take. Young Aragorn was learning about how to treat Morgul wounds in Rivendell.
Okay.
Young Aragorn, child Aragorn, would be in Rivendell at the time that Bilbo and the dwarves come through there. Mm-hmm. And undoubtedly, he's being instructed by Elrond in various things, and there are historical references to Morgul wounds. Frodo's is not the first. It seems a stretch to me that the dwarves would necessarily know about this. So the only explanation I could think of was that young Aragorn happened to be learning this lesson when the dwarves came through there, and Owen and Beaufort just happened to pick this up and know how to treat it. This is a stretch, I know.
Yeah, they don't.
But this is like the best I could come up with.
Yeah, they don't seem like the type to sit in on a local class in their travels, that's for sure.
But it would also explain to you how Aragorn knows how to treat it.
Yeah, fair.
And I do like an explanation that explains multiple things.
Yeah. I mean, Rivendell is clearly like the center of Middle Earth for treating morgul wounds, but it still doesn't make sense for Owen and Beau or any of the dwarves to know that.
It's not a dwarvish thing, and it's awfully convenient that Lake Town has Kingsfoil right there. And do they have like the healthiest pigs ever if the pigs are eating it all the time?
This is one of those scenes that I simply did not care for.
Yeah, me neither. Another thing I didn't care for about this whole Morgul wound business was that if Keely's wound is like Frodo's wound, that makes Tauriel a healer like Elrond is a healer. And Elrond is he's like the preeminent first place healer in all of Middle-earth.
Yeah, Aragorn basically like stymied or stopped the infection, but had to go to Elrond for full treatment.
Yeah, Aragorn couldn't do anything long-term against it. He was just trying to make sure that Frodo lived long enough to make it to Elrond.
Right, yeah.
It's first aid versus actual treatment.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with Tauriel as a person. Adding an elf character makes perfect sense. Making her a woman makes perfect sense. But giving her healing powers on the scale of Elrond does not.
I'm going to count this in as part of her love story subplot.
Yeah, it really is, because the only reason she's showing up to treat this is because she's in love with the dwarf. Yes. And he has a pillow of walnuts. What in the world even was that?
Yeah, I don't know.
So weird. So, next, we switch over to the whole problem with ring wraiths.
This is showing where Gandalf is supposed to be during all this, right? And Gandalf and Radagast are discussing something in there somewhere?
They're investigating the evil that Radagast has detected. Mm-hmm. They uncover the Witch King's grave and conclude that the necromancer is Sauron. Oh. Now, I kind of went into this in our last episode that I take issue with this because the Witch King doesn't have a grave. The Witch King never died. Mm-hmm. He has a ring of power that made him feel stretched and thin like butter scraped over too much bread, and his body faded. He never died. So he wouldn't have a grave. Sauron wouldn't be calling him back from the dead. That's not how any of this works.
Is this all extended as well?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, because I know that for a fact, again, I respect to make this a movie from a short child's novel, showing where Gandalf went is a good idea.
I do appreciate that they show where Gandalf goes and invest in the necromancer story. But I don't like how they did it.
Yes. Yeah, great idea. Awful's harsh. Great idea. Bad execution.
Amen.
Yeah, Gandalf.
But Gandalf meets Thrain while he's there.
That's another thing mentioned earlier in the talk, all the way back at the beginning. Gandalf finding Thrain is a pretty big deal because that's what Thorin was doing before Gandalf told him to go to the mountain and get the Arkenstone back, right? He was looking for his dad. Yeah. And Gandalf found him. There he is. And so I liked the visuals of the scene after the graveyard part.
Yeah.
It looked really cool. Thrain being like kind of all, withered, I guess is a good way to put it. And just Gandalf's magic, the special effects, I thought was pretty interesting. I do think it's definitely a derision from the original trilogy's movie, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I just really liked the whole look of the magic battle. And also just the acting, Gandalf slowly realizing that Sauron is like coming out and online right now and seeing him come into this world. Mm-hmm. Ooh, it was pretty intense stuff. So there were some good parts here that I did like. Kept me on the hook for a bit longer.
Good.
As we touched on earlier, they get to their destination and Smaug's there. The talk that Balin had with Bilbo reminded me of, I think in the last movie, where he's talking about, trying to advocate for don't put your life on the line. And I was just noting down it was good of him to do that.
Balin's a solid dwarf.
I did like how the dragon looked once Bilbo got to him. Smaug I feel like they depicted him pretty well with the scenes with Bilbo. He was intimidating and sneaky and like a sly worm, right?
Yeah.
His horde, I liked the look of it. All of that was great. I loved it.
I really liked the visual depiction of the sheer volume of the task of finding the Arkenstone.
Right.
But I want to note, it's at least a task fit for a burglar.
Yeah, it makes sense.
It might be a big one, it might be a challenge, but it's a burglar's job to find one thing and steal it. Can you imagine Bilbo trying to take that out in his pockets? I cannot.
No.
That is not the job of a burglar.
Yeah, no, definitely not. So the fight, I didn't make a note specifically on this, so this is coming out of left field, sorry, but I didn't like, after the dwarves were involved with the fight, a lot of the, Smaug seemed so, like, he couldn't even take down one of them. I don't know. It wasn't, in the books, I remember they were hiding, like, I think they even said, like, Mouse is hiding from a cat, and I didn't get that vibe from them in this at all. They were very out in the open very often.
Yeah. And you're right. I would think that a dragon would be able to take out a few dwarves easier than that, but generous take. Maybe he's a little rusty.
Yeah, he was just taking a nap like an hour ago or so.
Yeah, he's rolling low.
Right. Yeah, I wish there was like more parts where the dwarves could have hid in Bilbo that the dragon couldn't reach. Because that's what the books, I remember making it seem like, and how trapped and claustrophobic it felt for them hiding there. And none of that, it could have been, Peter Jackson's a horror director, it could have been terrifying more, the fight scene, instead of like an intense action scene, you know?
Yeah.
But he does eventually, I don't know how they would eventually have gotten to defeating Smaug if they were hiding, you know?
Well, they'd have to take a different route. I did like that it was Smaug who lights the furnaces. I noted that this was an instance of evil working against itself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that is one of our themes.
In his haste to try to get to the dwarves, he doesn't note that his fire can also be used against himself. Mm-hmm. So, small consolation, but I did like that. What I didn't like was that riding a metal boat in molten gold seems like a hot ride.
Yeah, no, that visually was awful. Hated it.
And I was also thinking that there's a very fine line between what the dwarves have going on here and industrialization.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this just earlier this episode, like the dwarves and mining, pretty industrial too.
That was in our appendix.
Oh, okay, I apologize. So
do you know what you can get if you sign up on our Patreon? You can get extra appendices that we record after the episode.
Yes.
This has been your public service announcement.
Yes. So in the appendix in the appendix we recorded for last episode, support us on Patreon. We mentioned industrialization and dwarves mining, and I don't know, the dwarves seem like an older form of, like, it technically would fall under industrialization, but it would be like pre-industrial revolution industry. Is what I get from the dwarves as a general vibe from Tolkien. Like, it's they mine, people mine, well into long history, prehistory even, and the dwarves really like mining, and they do it on a huge scale because they're so good at it. But they still don't do it on such a scale where it's like affecting the earth most of the time. And when they do, it backfires.
Yeah, and that's true. Industrialization never goes unpunished.
No. The evil.
So, in conclusion, as I was watching this movie, I identified the barrel ride as the point at which it lost me. But when I went back and read my notes, I saw that they indicate that the movie goes downhill when the elves show up at the spiders.
I will say, those are pretty close together scenes. Somewhere around that point, though, I would say probably when the elves show up. As I said earlier, every other scene was, like, pretty hard to get through, but there was still, like, it was like kind of watching someone die. I could see the flits of life and inspiration coming through, even all the way to the end almost. And I could, it's like holding on to dear life. And I have to say, though, this is the first movie that I would not give like a perfect, like, even an Unexpected Journey, it would be either 8 or 9 out of 10 if I'm rating it and how much I enjoyed it. This got a few points lower, maybe a 6 or a 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
And the trilogy, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, all 10s, obviously.
Obviously. So
this is like, it was hard to watch. I always try to see the good in the movie, but there were just some scenes that were just painful to get through. It's hard to see because the bones of a very good movie were there, and I feel like if they just tweaked it a bit, it could have been a 9 out of 10 easily, just with a few small changes.
I entirely agree. I also think that the issues with this movie would be overlooked if the third movie had delivered.
Well, we'll see how I feel about the third movie next time.
Well, it's kind of like in The Two Towers. I had more issues with The Two Towers than you did, but I overlook the issues I have with The Two Towers because The Return of the King is awesome.
Yeah.
If Battle of the Five Armies had been an awesome movie, I probably could overlook some of this stuff.
Oh, you're breaking my heart. The Battle of Five Armies, like, so easily could be an awesome movie, too, from what I know about the book and where the story is going from here. But it sounds like, in your opinion, at least, it didn't deliver fully.
Not to me. I hope that you enjoy it. May you enjoy it.
I'm going to give it my Boy Scout best.
Let's give it all the generous takes we got.
So that was it for our rings.
Now let's do our things. So JD, there weren't many good quotes in this movie.
Yeah, that was another thing, too. The dialogue didn't have any of the interesting frills. It was very utilitarian. I did like when Thorin was trying to move on from saving Bilbo. Balin is just, and again, a lot. This was the dialogue, the wording of it's not poetically worded, but the delivering of Bilbo. His name is Bilbo. When he kept saying the burglar or something, we need to move on. Balin had he's a great guy, great dwarf.
He really is. Balin is reminding Thorin to humanize Bilbo.
Right, and because Thorin, I think, is like trying to move on or leave him to peril of some sort. So, Agnes, do you have any quotes?
I had a few that I pulled just because I needed something to talk about for this segment, but nothing really jumped out at me super much. My favorite quote of the movie was, "Fell things creep beneath those trees." I guess I'm a sucker for the phrase "fell things."
Fell things that's good. It feels like the listeners probably won't know much, but for recording we do Harvard sentences, which are like sentences designed to have a certain sound. It feels like this could be designed for like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's a nicely concocted sentence, I will say.
Yeah.
Fell things creep beneath those trees.
A quote I wasn't a big fan of that stood out to me was Azog's quote, "We are legion," which is a allusion to the Bible, really, it feels like. When Jesus is casting out demons from a man, the demon tells him, "My name is Legion because we are many." And it just really felt out of place to have Azog quoting the Bible. And I mean, yeah, he's quoting a demon, but I just wasn't expected to be ripped out of Lord of the Rings and thrust into the Bible.
Yeah. Azog saying "we are legion" without the Judeo-Christian context, or it would be strictly Christian technically, is like it would be just like saying "we're a squad," like, or something like that. Like the oomph from the saying "we are legion" is that reference to that verse, which is honestly one of the one of the craziest Bible stories in my opinion. But yeah, it like, again, within their world, this quote would not have that impact. It's just like, it would be like saying "we're an army." Like, yeah.
Exactly. Another thing that stood out to me in the quotes was when Smaug says, "No blade can pierce me." And it made me think of the Witch King's quote, "No man can kill me." Yes. Just like Merry and Éowyn can kill the Witch King because they aren't men, the arrow that will ultimately kill Smaug is also not a blade that will pierce him.
It is not a blade, yes. That is a good one. Honestly, out of all the quotes, that's probably my favorite, even more than the one I picked.
So we have a follow-up on a Hobbit Habit to bring to you.
Hobbit Habits. We were
supposed to celebrate Yule.
Which you specified last time was mostly on the day of Yule. What we were going to do is intentionally just enjoy some hot chocolate with some fireplace ambiance, or a real fireplace if you could, which I unfortunately didn't have the privilege of.
I don't either.
I mean, I do have a space heater with a fire front and it blows out heat, so it is nicer than just like YouTube fireplace display because it actually has the heat too. It's a little bit closer of a simulation, and I enjoyed my hot chocolate with cloves, and I think I need to stop doing that around Christmas time because I like warm beverages generally. I like cloves generally. I like chocolate generally. I don't see why this can't be an all-season drink, or at least all cool season. It doesn't need to be just around Christmas Yule time for me.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I ended up turning on a specially Shire-themed Christmas ambiance.
Ooh.
And it had a fireplace in the scene. We can link the video that I watched in the description below. And I decided to go with a cup of eggnog. A cup of real eggnog.
Ooh, like, you mean egg in beer? Real eggnog?
Like alcoholic eggnog.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, like the classic late medieval drink is they mix raw egg with beer.
Yeah.
That's not. I would try it, but I don't think I'd like it. Mm-hmm. But no, like a classic 1800s eggnog with whipped cream.
I didn't put whipped cream on it. It was just out of a wine bottle. But
I mean, I did also imbue in some real eggnog drinking over the holiday season. Mm-hmm. That was quite enjoyable too. That wasn't intentionally a Hobbit habit, but it was during festivities with friends, so I think it counts.
My husband and I ended up looking at pictures of the kids from over the last year, and it was really nice to just kind of not be watching something, not be doing something,
right.
And we made some time to look at pictures of the kids. It was a really nice evening.
Yeah, that's always really important.
So, next we have Tolkien trivia. I have 3 questions for our listeners, and I will give the answers at the beginning of our next episode.
Okay, hit me with them.
First question. What caused Sir Ian McKellen to consider dropping his role as Gandalf in the Hobbit movies?
That's I don't know the answer, but that's a crazy fact that he was considering that.
Next, how did Bombur manage to run faster than all the other dwarves in the Desolation of Smaug? Mm-hmm. Remember, Bombur's the biggest dwarf.
Yeah, he was one of the 13 that are actually mentioned in the books because of how big he was.
Yes. But in the movie, there's a scene where they're all running, and Bombur runs faster than everyone else.
I didn't notice that.
How did they manage to film that scene?
Oh, how did they manage to film it? I thought you meant like in lore if he had some sort of ability. But no, you mean like how did they actually, okay, got it.
I mean, Bombur's a bigger guy. How did he manage to run faster than everybody else? Mm-hmm. And finally, which dwarf used real facial hair?
So the question implies there's only one and the rest are fake.
Correct. 12 out of the 13 used artificial facial hair. 1 used his real facial hair. Which one used real facial hair?
I'm surprised about that too. Oh my God.
And that brings us to the end of our podcast. You can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram through the links in the description. Please follow, like, and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and other major podcast platforms. To have your question or comment featured on the podcast, please send an email to shirepost.ringsandthings@gmail.com.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider contributing to our efforts through the Patreon link in the description.
A hearty hobbity thank you to our first supporter, Lori J. from Florida. We are deeply grateful for your support.
And a special thank you to our editor and spiritual producer, Stephen Jeffrey. And thank you for listening.